Welcome back, everybody, to Horror with Nadia. I'm the host of the channel, Nadia, and today is a very special Horror Tuesday. It is a writer's spotlight. Before I introduce my guests and bring them back from backstage or on screen, please do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share out the stream as well. And I believe my guests will be open for questions, so drop them in the chat. Today, Andrew Grevas, I think I did that right. I see him nodding backstage. Yep. Is joining me to discuss his book, Horror in Haddonfield, The Untold Stories of Halloween. It is a full book about the Halloween franchise with over 20 interviews with cast, crew. And I would say he called it a love letter to the Halloween franchise. So without further ado, let me bring on Andrew. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining me today.
You got the pronunciation right, and you got the love letter part right. You're killing it. You're killing it.
Man, you should see my other interviews. I have your book. I have something to highlight. I will say before we get into it, if you are a fan of the franchise, if you're not even a fan, if you're just a horror fan, this is a great book. Like, I learned so much that I didn't even know about the franchise. So thank you for coming on to talk to me about it.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, before we get into the book, I want to know a little bit more about you and what shaped you into having this love letter to Halloween. What was your general first introduction to horror?
I was 5 years old, and this commercial was playing on TV, and it was for a television show. And the commercial said, "It's a nice place to live, but you wouldn't want to die there." And I was terrified. I was 5 years old. This is the scariest thing I've ever heard. And it was for David Lynch and Mark Frost's Twin Peaks. And my mom sat down to watch it. And as a 5-year-old, I sat next to her on the couch and just kind of cozied on in. Like, I'm going to try to watch this with mom. And she didn't shoo me out of the room. She let me watch it with her. And that became our thing each week, is she would just let me sit with her while she watched it. She didn't think I was absorbing any of it. She thought I was too young. But I realized at the age of 5 that I like being scared. There was something exhilarating about it. There was something, my senses were heightened. And when Twin Peaks ended, the next thing was Halloween. My cousin and I found a recorded VHS tape of the original 1978 Halloween, and we snuck down to his basement, popped it in the VCR and watched it. And I think we were 6 or 7. And it was kind of off to the races from that point. Horror from way too young of an age, which I think is relatable for a lot of us. You know, those sneaking around to find things that we shouldn't find that scare us, and cultivate that love.
I had similar. My mom was big into horror, so similar. I watched Chucky for the first time, Child's Play, when I was probably too young for it. But I horror is definitely different back. I'm a millennial. I think you're about an elder millennial or a generation. So VHS rentals, our parents really didn't watch what we rented and picked out. It was just a horror movie, right? And they grew up with great movies from the 60s and 70s that were in that genre. So I can relate to that. Being too young for it, but still it grew my love for it. Is there a particular type of horror genre that you're more drawn to than the others?
Interestingly enough, no. I kind of all over the place. I love slashers. That's probably not much of a surprise. But I'm also somebody who can appreciate elevated horror, even though I don't like that phrase. And, you know, there's not really a subgenre that I don't like, which I think just speaks to the cinephile part of me. You know, I appreciate film for all of its wonders, and some genres I prefer over others, but I can't sit here and tell you there's any subgenre that I dislike.
I also don't like the term elevated horror. I think horror is what I like to say as it's like a huge umbrella with subgenres in it. And something could be horror and sci-fi, something could be horror and thriller. There's not so much an elevated, it's just particular taste of like what you like. Some people like gore, some people like possession movies.
And now, hasn't horror always been elevated to some extent?
Yeah. Horror has always been a genre that's easy to tell a story, I think, in how the world is structured at the time that story is being told. So there's a lot of different meanings that can happen in horror. Horror can stand for a lot of different things, depending on the the creator, if he's going through something personal, political. It covers all. But sometimes it's just fun to see clown slash people apart, and there's no deep meaning to it. So I think there's a little bit for everybody.
Absolutely.
My opinion. So have you always been drawn to the Halloween franchise?
I pretty much from that first viewing of the 1978 John Carpenter Halloween, I've been a sucker for this franchise. I don't think that ever really stopped. There were some times when my interest dipped a little bit, but I always came back to it. It's been a pretty steady relationship in my life. But I've also been like that with Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and some of the other series that, when you're our age, with you and I being a similar age, like, you just have a soft spot for these franchises. They're part of your upbringing. And who didn't stay up way too late on a Friday night as a teenager watching Nightmare on Elm Street films?
Yeah.
We all did it. Halloween, to me, I was always more drawn to that franchise than the others, but I absolutely have a soft spot for Friday the 13th and Elm Street and Hellraiser, and we could sit here and go on and on.
That's fine. We can. That's what this channel is for. I love slashers too. Scream is one of my favorite. Love it or hate it.
Yeah.
All of them. I'll watch it.
I am a huge Scream fan. I recently told somebody that when I was coming up with pitches for the book, one of my pitches was actually a Scream book, and it turned out to be Halloween. That's the direction I went, but Scream was on the table at a certain point in time.
Do you think we'll get into your book briefly here, but do you think you'll ever go back to that idea? Maybe explore a different franchise?
Definitely a different franchise. I think with Scream, some time needs to pass. Now that they're kind of moving into this new Kevin Williamson era, there's a lot of stories that are going to be told on the big screen. So down the road, something like what I do in terms of these books might be more interesting if we let Kevin make 3 or 4 more Scream films and then we kind of revisit it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you on that one. So your book was, again, a very enjoyable read. I am not a huge fan of the Halloween franchise. I like Halloween. I grew up with it. I've seen all of them. But the interesting history and your essays to me were my favorite. I did love the interviews, but the in-between essays that you wrote, a couple of things I highlighted into it. But as I pull up the first one, what inspired you to finally write about Halloween?
My buddy Scott Ryan owns the publishing company that published this book, and I had written for his magazine years ago. Scott and I have been friends. Anytime he published a book, I would interview him and put it out on the different websites I've written for over the years. Scott's just a dear friend. And he was texting me, and he's like, "When are you going to write a book, man?" He's like, "It's time. You've been writing for magazines, websites." He's like, you've been doing this a long time. Like, let's take the book plunge. And I was thinking, like, what am I passionate enough to write a book about? Like, if I'm going to do this, and I'd always wanted to write a book, like, it had to be something that I really loved. And I came up with the 3 different ideas that I thought would be a good first book. But Halloween Ends was getting ready to come out. So there was this buzz around Halloween again. And I was thinking about it, and my wife was like, "That's the one that you keep talking about the most." She's like, "Out of all these ideas, Halloween is the one that you keep bringing up in conversation." And I think subconsciously I knew that I wanted to do Halloween for my first book, but Ends kind of terrified me. Like, what about if I don't like this film? It wasn't out yet. I was like, if I don't like it, do I want to do this book? Like, maybe like the critical reaction is going to be so bad that I don't want to touch it. So I told Scott, if I like this film, I'll write the book. And he sent me a contract. And I was like, if I don't like the film, let me pitch you a few different ideas. And I was one of the weirdos that liked Halloween Ends Night 1.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. I'm lukewarm on it, so I don't hate it, but it's not my favorite out of the franchise. But that is interesting because it's a movie that not a lot of people like.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I like movies sometimes people don't like, so I think we all should not have the same opinion about things. Art is subjective, right?
Exactly. And Halloween Ends is about as subjective as it gets.
Yes.
What I appreciate about the film is its style. It did not aim to be another slasher movie. It did not aim to be your stereotypical third part of a trilogy. It was its own film, and it was a film about trauma. It, if you think about the town of Haddonfield as a character, it's this character has been through a lot over the last few years, and no different than a city like New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. You know, what does that look like 5 years after the fact? What are the people doing 5 years after disaster? And that's what Halloween Ends attempted to explore. The Michael and Laurie components were really secondary. The film was about what do we do afterwards? And Haddonfield didn't look like a nice place. You know, the people were turning on each other. The people were cold. Nobody was helping one another. They were victimizing one another. And in that sense, it's kind of a depressing film, you know, because you would like to think that the place that you live is going to come together after really bad things happen. But Halloween Ends was a look at what happens when things don't go well and neighbors aren't looking out for one another. And the character of Corey becomes this proxy. You know, they made him a villain. He wasn't an inherently bad person, but he became a villain because the town needed somebody new to blame. And it's heavy when you think about it along those lines.
Interesting. I never thought of it from that perspective. I wonder now, going back watching it, if I would see that, because I always thought in some way it reflected a cycle of trauma in the series. So it's similar to that. And using Corey, I think people were just, I think the response to Halloween Ends is similar to Halloween 3 with Season of the Witch, where they were expecting this Michael Myers revenge slasher type movie, and because in a sense Michael almost took a back seat in Halloween Ends, there was a pushback similar to Season of the Witch. Everybody's like, hey, another Halloween movie's coming out. Michael's not in it. What's going on? Which I love. Season of the Witch is one of my favorite movies. I think I think a lot of people kind of overlook it. One of the things I highlighted just right on your first page was, while we often idealize the 1960s and the 1970s, make no mistake about how violent that period of time was. And people really do think, I think you're right, because I think media portrays those eras as, you know, white picket fence, you know, pie in the window kind of deal. But no, there's a lot of violent historical things that happened during that time. So that caught me right away.
We want to think about bell bottoms, and we want to think about the hippies in a romantic sense. Like, they were having so much fun at Woodstock with flowers in their hair. No, like, there was all these violent, turbulent things happening in the world that caused people to do these things, that caused people to protest and to band together. The evening news in the 60s and 70s was terrifying, much scarier than Halloween. But Halloween, to again use the word proxy, Michael Myers became a proxy for that real world violence. And that was something that really, really interested me after I knew that I was doing this book and I started to think about the franchise on a deeper level. I became very interested in that, Michael's cultural relevance. And I also started to think, there are people in 1978 that saw this film at the drive-in, and then they had kids who grew up watching Halloween 4, 5, and 6, and their kids were watching the new films as they came out streaming on Peacock. The Halloween franchise is now bridged at least 3 generations. You could talk to your grandmother at Thanksgiving about Halloween. How wild is that? You know, Michael Myers has that kind of cultural relevance. Freddy Krueger doesn't. You know, not everybody has seen a Nightmare on Elm Street film. Not everybody has seen a Friday the 13th film, but Halloween does have that kind of impact. And that to me is pretty astounding, really.
It's why usually when you ask people about villains in horror movies, Michael's like one of the first things people mention, the shape of Michael and Halloween movies. Halloween is also one of a lot of people's first movies throughout generations as well. Thinking back to the 70s, even looking at horror movies back then, they were very violent, sometimes even more violent than modern day horror movies. And I think people just forget about that because all they see are just the pop culture references nowadays. I don't think, especially younger generations, spend the time to watch these movies and have discussions about them and the meanings behind them. I think it's too much of the TikTok brain where everything has to be given to me in 3 minutes or less, or I'm bored with it. But I think that's what makes these movies so great, that there's love and attention put into them. It's not just a fast turnaround, Blumhouse. It's just like love and attention put into it. Have you seen not to go off track, have you seen Night Swim at all? Have you ever seen Night Swim? I wanted to drown myself after that movie. I have a problem with Blumhouse.
Most people hated Night Swim, and I won't sit here and defend it. I absolutely cannot do that. But I do remember thinking, like, it wasn't as bad as everybody made it sound. Like, it wasn't great, but like I didn't hate it, I suppose I should say. But maybe I'm just in the minority. Yeah, I think I'm just in the minority on everything.
It's okay. Welcome to my life. I'm in the minority with my YouTube community with everything. But you know what? It keeps us honest, right? I rather be honest about my opinion of things, even if people disagree with me or they like a certain franchise. Like, I think The Crow is a very overrated movie, and that's my opinion. But
I'm with you on that.
All right.
Yeah, it's
you
fine.
hear it first. Yeah. I think it was just overhyped for me before I saw it. So what was the biggest challenge in writing this book? Because there's a ton of interviews, some from people that I'm very surprised you were able to sit down with. What was like some of the biggest challenges in writing it?
I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to get as many interviews as possible. And I started to get that neurotic writer brain going on where I was like, is this good enough? Is this going to live up to the documentaries that already exist or the other books that already exist? And it became this quest to get as many as I could. And it was self-created pressure. Nobody was telling me you have to interview Danielle Harris. Nobody was telling me you have to interview Scout or Dean Cundey or any of these people who are huge, who have these amazing careers in Hollywood. But I became very competitive with myself. Can I get another one? And as this book started humming along, some of those early interviews, like Tom Atkins was pretty early on, and some pretty cool people that I got in the very beginning. I didn't want to rest on my laurels either. Like, oh, well, you interviewed Tom Atkins. This book's already great. Everybody loves Uncle Tom. Like, I don't want to do that, So to continue to keep pushing and just try to get as many as I could, it was very stressful. And I think that was the hardest part, was that self-induced stress. And I think any writer or creative person can relate to that.
Yes. Yeah. I had the writer on for Woman in the Yard a couple months back, and same thing. I think as artists and creators, the biggest hurdle is yourself, and the challenge that you have of, you want things to be, we're perfectionists, right? We want things perfect in what we see in our mind. So I completely agree with you. How long did it take you to get all these interviews and put this together? How long was the writing process?
If you include editing, it was 2 years almost to the day.
Wow.
Yeah, that's with editing.
With editing. Wow. Is there somebody that you wish you could have interviewed to add to the book within time?
There's a lot.
Okay.
I'll use James Jude Courtney as an example. He brilliantly played Michael Myers in the Blumhouse trilogy, and that performance just really stands the test of time. I think him and I were texting up until the day that I submitted the book, just trying to find an hour to get on the phone. And he's a very busy man. He really wanted to be a part of it, and if he had it his way, I would have gotten an extension from my publisher. I wish that I could have, but we were up against the clock at this point, and it just didn't work out. So the last text that James sent me was, in horror, there's always a sequel. And when you do the sequel, I will be your first interview. So I did laugh because a few people have made that joke to me, like, "Oh, you're going to do a horror in Haddonfield too," and I had never even thought about that until people started saying it to me. But now, like, it's on the brain. Like, should I be thinking about that? Do they know something I don't know? But that was an interview that I really wish I would have had it in there. There was a few others that didn't work out. Judy Greer, that almost happened. I'm a huge fan of Judy Greer as an actress. Just kidding, and so many of her other performances. She's somebody that I've just championed over the years, and it didn't pan out. Again, just a very busy person who's in the prime of her career, and we couldn't get the schedules to match up. So I'm hoping that maybe one day that will work out. Rob Zombie, I know, thought about it. I think the chapter 5 of the book, The Zombie Era, hopefully paints the picture of how much turmoil he went through making these two films and how stressful his job was. And I don't know how much he wants to talk about it. He went through a lot, and he's trying to move on with his life and kind of heal from the things that he were put through at the hands of the Weinsteins. And I wanted to be the one to capture his story, but it didn't work out. He was very polite, very gracious. Maybe one day, but having some of the other people who worked on his films kind of get to tell part of his story for him, I thought was powerful. And I hope that readers kind of take away a little bit of appreciation for Rob when they get to that chapter.
I definitely did. I'm not a huge fan of his Halloween movies, but it did give me a different perspective of it. Just for you to know, I used to work in Hollywood. I worked 13 years doing special effects makeup in Hollywood. So I've seen the worst of it and the best of it. And it definitely gave me a little bit of PTSD on sets and stuff, but I can appreciate it even more so from that perspective. Is there somebody that you did interview that just didn't get into the book, just didn't work with how the book is laid out?
Here's a scoop for you. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this, but I interviewed Greg Nicotero, and obviously one of the most brilliant people in all of Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, there was a huge technology fail, and the audio was corrupted. So when I sat down to transcribe it, it was a big nothing burger. And his assistant is the sweetest lady in the world. Her name is Regina. And I was like, Regina, you're not going to believe it. And she's like, he's getting ready to go work on the 27 Walking Dead shows that he's the executive producer of. Like, she's like, you literally had his only free afternoon for like the next year. So we never got to follow it up. I have those conversations burned into my brain. I think he had some tremendous stories about his work on Halloween 5 and H2O. It's just unfortunate that our readers didn't get to enjoy them the same way that I did.
That's why there's always good for a sequel.
There we go.
Now, I want to. The interviews are great, but again, I think your essays really kind of round the book out. I really enjoyed those parts of each chapter. Was there more interest in maybe doing a just full-on essay style without the interviews first before getting into it?
That was the original concept.
Okay.
While interviews have always kind of been my thing, I enjoy writing. I think everybody expects me to do interviews. So, but writing is what I want to do. And when I came up with the initial concept for this book, it was all essays. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll sneak a few interviews in just to kind of round it out. And when I sat down for the very first interview, it was Stacey Nelkin, and I was talking to her, and I had so much fun talking to her about Season of the Witch. Like, she's just the kindest, sweetest, funniest lady. And she had these amazing stories. And it was one of those light bulb moments where I was like, I shouldn't fill this book with essays. Like, I need to tell some of these stories. I need to document these stories and get them out there. And all credit to Stacey, how giving she was in that conversation made me look at my concept differently. And I started to change my plans around. I have a bunch of ideas for additional essays and topics that did not get explored in this book that very well could be explored at a later date and time. The ideas are all there. They're all typed out, like they're all documented. I should say that. I didn't finish the essays, but I have all those concepts there of what I originally wanted the book to be. But that Stacey Nelkin interview was so much fun and so illuminating that I changed my path. And it's kind of that David Lynch mentality of, when a good idea smacks you in the face, run with it. And that's what it was. And I was confident enough in my own intuition just to be like, yep, that's the right direction. Let's change plans.
Was there an interview that how do I want to be polite about this to your that you were they were not like something you were expecting, like you're going in expecting people to, in a sense, to be like her the entire time, passionate about this project and stuff, and turned out like one of them probably wasn't so much, so you had to edit a little bit?
Yeah, there was one interview that was a little bit more hostile in nature that I edited a lot of that out.
Okay.
And you probably wouldn't be able to tell which one it is just because of the way that it was shaped.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that my editor and I worked on together, because I went to David Bushman, my editor, who's the co-owner of the publishing company. And I was like, David, we got a problem here. And he was kind enough to kind of work with me on shaping that to where it came across more friendly and more in the same tune as the rest of the book. There was another one that I thought was just really boring. And I tried to clean it up the best that I could. And I've heard people like point out to me like, hey, I love 24 out of the 25 interviews in the book, but there's one that just wasn't the same. And you win some, you lose some. Yeah. You win some, you lose some. And I tried really hard, but I don't know. You don't always hit a home run, and that's okay, because there's still things in that particular interview I like. It's just not as good as it should have been.
Is there something you learned about the franchise that you had no idea of going into, even though you have a vast knowledge of it?
Yes, there was a few things that really, really caught me off guard, and not just the Kathleen Kenmont makeout story at the end of her interview. I didn't know that one, but I appreciated that one. But Shem Bitterman, who wrote Halloween 5, I don't want to give too much of this away, but it was the biggest shocker for me when he kind of went into detail on his work on Halloween 4. Now, I think most people knew that he had written a script of Halloween 4 that he was not credited for, but he goes into great detail and even provides documentation, which is shared in the book, as to how much he was involved with that film. That was the biggest shocker for me. But also, the director of Halloween 5, Dominique, expressed how involved Deborah Hill was on Halloween 5, which I don't think most people in the fandom knew. One of my goals for this book was to capture as many Deborah Hill stories as possible. I think she's an unsung hero of this franchise, and unfortunately she passed away way too young. Otherwise, we might be championing her more today, as the genre treats its female artists a little bit more favorably than it did 20 years ago. If Deborah were here today, I think we would be having much different conversations. But unfortunately, she did pass away way too young, and I tried to get as many great Deborah Hill stories as I could. I think Dominique from Halloween 5 shared some pretty cool ones that shocked me, because I just wasn't aware that she was involved at all in Halloween 5. And I thought I knew everything.
I agree with you. Those were probably my favorite parts of the book, to learn a little bit more about her, especially as a woman who worked in the film industry, and knowing, back in the day, it's a very, when I was in it, very male dominating, especially horror. There's a couple key directors, but especially even with special effects, it's a male dominated industry. So I was very appreciative reading that and getting to know a little bit more about her throughout the interviews that you had. Is there a particular favorite interview that you liked other than the first one? Is there, you know what? Give me your top 3. from the book? Top three.
I mean, even that's tough because they're all so different. I'll go over just a few of them here.
Okay.
Paul Brad Logan, the writer of Halloween Ends, that one, cards on the table. He was the third interview I conducted in one day. I had spoken to Dwight Little in the morning, Dee Wallace in the afternoon, and Paul Brad Logan at night. And I was tired by the third one. I was like, my brain was kind of fried. And I told him that at the start of the call. I was like, man, it's been a long day. And he's like, you talked to Dee Wallace today? And I was like, I did. And we just had this like 20-minute conversation about how incredible Dee Wallace is. And it wasn't even like an interview. It was like two guys who just love the genre and love film talking about E.T.'s mom. And it was the most amazing experience. And our guards were down. And then we went into this really cool interview. And I think that's kind of my style in general, where I do try to befriend these people. And I try to not seem like journalist guy who has my list of 20 questions. Like, let's talk. And Danielle Harris is another one. Like, we related a lot about being parents, and Dwight Little and I related a lot about being from Ohio, and just finding those things that you have in common with people and talking to them just the same way that you and I are talking right now. So Paul Brad Logan's definitely one. I think his stories were amazing. It turns out that we both have a shared love of David Lynch, both considered Lynch our favorite director. So it was like little things like that were cool that come out in the interview. And I think people who don't like Halloween Ends might gain a little bit more of appreciation after reading that one. Second one, Danielle Harris. I mean, she's literally just the coolest. And, I knew I wasn't going to get John Carpenter or Jamie Lee Curtis. They're just such huge stars. But Danielle Harris is like the third piece of that puzzle. She is so identifiable with this franchise. And she was like my headliner, so to speak. Like, if you can get Danielle Harris, like, you've got one of the big people from the franchise. And she was just so friggin' cool. Like, like I couldn't imagine somebody being any nicer and any more giving with their time. And she got her own chapter because she deserved it, but also because we sat on the phone for 2 hours and she told me these amazing stories. And she was giving with her time. She's like, what do you want to know? And she was just telling me, like, okay, let's go there. And some of that stuff wound up being off the record. I told her, or I showed her the transcripts later, and she's like, let's pull some of that back a little bit. But that's understandable. You don't want to have everything out there. But I could not appreciate her enough. And mid-conversation, she's like, have you talked to Scout yet? And I was like, no, I haven't. She's like, well, let me text her. And she texts Scout mid-interview and like locked in that interview for me. And a few weeks later, I'm sitting on a Zoom call with Scout. And that was another one of my favorite conversations. Scout went through so much on those two Halloween films with Rob Zombie. She is one of the more emotional interviews in the book. And I hope that comes out. I hope what she went through as a young actress who's being told that she's not cute enough and that she doesn't look like Jamie Lee Curtis, and people are like bashing her appearance and the things that she went through because of early 2000s internet culture and how toxic it can be. Like, it's tough. And she was 17, 18 years old. She turned 18 on set, and that's one of my favorite stories in that interview. She talks about having her 18th birthday on set. And it's such a simple thing, but she's talking about chasing Rob Zombie around with a piece of birthday cake to smash in his face. And it's just charming. It's endearing. And I don't know, it's not like juicy onset gossip, but I love those kind of stories. It humanizes the people who are making the art that we love so much. I could go on and on. Dwight Little was great. Dean Cundy is just this encyclopedia of film knowledge, and most of the interviews in the book do hold a special place in my heart. But you asked for 3, and I'm going to try to be as respectful as I can about that.
You're fine. You're fine. Was it easy to track down people to get these interviews? Like, were most of them open to sit down with you?
I mean, I sent out a lot of requests and got a lot of no's and a lot of non-responses, which is always the worst because you're like holding on to that little sliver of hope, like maybe they'll email tomorrow. But the people that show up in the book, most of them I found through their publicists and managers, but some of them, like for example, Dwight Little personally emailed Danielle Harris and Alan McElroy and said, I had a great time talking to Andrew. Consider talking to him, please. And he CC'd me on the email. And, you know, you can't ask for anything more than that. And then, like I said, Danielle got me the interview with Scout. A friend of mine knew Stacy Nelkin. They're friends. That's how that interview turned out. But everybody else I kind of tracked down through their publicist or manager for the most part.
That's my advice always to content creators that start off, or even ones that are, just ask. That's how a lot of my interviews, like with you, just ask. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, people just are passionate about their art and their projects. They want to talk about it. So just ask, and what's the worst case? They ghost you or just say no, or they just limit the amount of time you have for them. But can't say no unless I ask for it.
Yeah, and then just don't be disappointed. Like if you're new to like content creating, like don't be disappointed if somebody says no. Don't be disappointed if you get a non-response. You know, somebody will say yes, and that's going to be an amazing experience. But to your point, like you don't know until you try.
Yeah. Is now with the book, is there any so when I was reading it, let me check. When I was reading it, it read almost like a documentary in a weird way. Like I was watching a documentary about the Halloween franchise. Is there maybe any hopes or talks about potentially taking this and moving it to screen or something like that?
Nobody has ever mentioned that idea to me. I had it.
10%.
You're in. Like, it was one of those like weird thoughts that I had at like 2 a.m. in the morning when I was up transcribing one night working on the book. I was like, this is like a documentary. But it was just one of those things that I kind of tucked away in the back of my head. But you're the first person that said that besides me thinking it. It's a cool idea. Would I love that? Absolutely. You know, so if somebody out there's listening that can make that happen, sign us up. She gets 10%.
I mean, you could, in a sense, do it yourself with YouTube nowadays, right? There's a ton of ways for people to be creative without the restrictions. So I honestly think this would be a great I love horror documentaries about franchises. There's a great one about It. There's one about Nightmare on Elm Street and such. So I definitely could see this book being translated to that. If you were to write a second book, would you do the same format of essays and interviews, or is there something you would change up?
If I hypothetically did it, it would probably be similar, you know, but for me, like if I were to go back, like there's a few like big interviews that I really wish I would have got. Like if I had a chance at getting John Carpenter or Jamie Lee Curtis or Rob Zombie or Joe Chappelle, like I would be gravitated towards this idea. But it would probably be pretty similar because I do have a lot of essay ideas that I would like to one day write, and that would obviously be a cool way to do so. But I'm very captivated by this idea of telling the stories of Haddonfield. As I was working on the book, that was kind of how I envisioned this project. Was Haddonfield was a real place, and the people who worked on these films were the citizens of Haddonfield, and I was telling their story. And that's how I kind of like came to terms with this book. Like, this is what it is. I'm telling the stories of the people of Haddonfield. So if I were to do another book, I would want to tell more of their stories while also getting some of these other ideas across.
Is there any? Are you sick of the Halloween movies yet? With the 2 years you've had to spend writing the book and probably watching them back to back too as well.
I definitely was for a while.
Okay.
I submitted the book right around Valentine's Day of this year. I think it was the 13th. And for a few months, I did not want to think about Halloween. Like I was done. But now that like I'm kind of doing these kind of things like podcasts and YouTube channels, and the weather is changing too. I'm reverting back to like fan me, where I'm like, ooh, it's getting to be spooky season. I want to watch Season of the Witch, or I want to watch Halloween 4. And I suppose that's how you know it's true love. A little bit of distance, and I'm ready to go back.
There is one movie in the entire franchise that you had to remove, completely remove from existence. Which one would it be?
With all due apologies to Busta Rhymes, Halloween Resurrection.
Yeah, that's a rough one. That's a rough
Yeah.
one to watch. But that's during the time of like millennial horror, I like to call, where we had uh additions to certain franchises that were kind of catering to that millennial age and stuff, and using artists and movies, like different people from different types of media into these things. So I can forgive it for for the
Yeah.
time frame it was. But yeah,
You know, there's certainly like redeeming qualities from that film, and there's things that rewatching it, working on the book, I was like, oh, I appreciate that now, and maybe I didn't in 2002. And here comes a kitty.
I saw one in the back too, and
Yeah, they're everywhere. I'm surrounded by cats, but
it's okay.
but I can appreciate things about Resurrection now that perhaps I didn't in 2002. They were ahead of the curve with streaming and things like that, that nowadays like are just part of our basic everyday life. They were cutting edge there. Their fatal sin was trying to make a standalone Halloween film, which in this series we're accustomed to ongoing stories. Halloween 4 bleeds into Halloween 5, which bleeds into Halloween 6. And here in Resurrection, they were trying to end the ongoing narrative and start over without a hook for what comes next. And that just doesn't work in this series. We expect continuity. We expect the story to go someplace. And I think that is what disappoints most people, even if they can't articulate that.
As somebody who's a fan of the franchise, I have to ask this question because I've been wanting.
Sure.
What do you think of the whole twist to, because Halloween 1 and 2 are pretty much one consistent story, right? We're at the same night come Halloween 2. Halloween 3 is on its own. What do you think of the twist of now the cult storyline that was added in the later movies to kind of, because before you go, in my opinion, I think Michael Myers is more intimidating and when he is almost a supernatural being that just, there's no explanation, let the audience kind of fill it in. And I feel that the cult storyline cheapened it a little bit, in my opinion, but I'm curious as somebody who's a big fan of the franchise.
It's tough because I definitely see your point, and that's what made the first Halloween so scary. We don't know why he's doing this. There's no sister explanation in Halloween 1. There's no supernatural explanation in Halloween 1. He's literally just a dude who is out there killing babysitters, and we don't know why. That's terrifying to me. I think Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, had good intentions, but they were backed into a corner. And they were backed into a corner because the film before them was backed into a corner. And it was this snowball effect that led us to this point where there had to be some kind of answers. Halloween 4 had the greatest hook ending ever, but it put Halloween 5 in a situation where they were faced with a 10-year-old girl being a serial killer. That doesn't play well. Like as much as we love the shock ending, does anyone want to see 10-year-old Jamie Lloyd stabbing people in Halloween 5? Nobody does. We can sit here and talk about how Halloween 5 took the easy way out, but if I were in that position, I would also want to back out of Halloween 4 ending where they set her up as the villain. But Halloween 5 introduces this mysterious man in black. And what's he doing? He's freeing Michael Myers from jail. And now Curse has to answer all of these things. And it's an unenviable position where they have to create answers. And that was the biggest takeaway that I had from my conversation with the writer of Curse of Michael Myers, Dan Ferens, was he felt an obligation to answer all of these lingering questions. How do I tie all of these films together, including Season of the Witch? He very much had ideas for tying Season of the Witch into the main mythology, which would have been tremendous. And there is an alternate universe out there somewhere where the Weinsteins did not interfere with Dan Ferens and let him do his thing, and us Halloween fans got to appreciate it because Dan is one of us. He is a fan first and foremost, and he wrote his film and a treatment for a hypothetical Halloween 7 as a fan too.
It's it's interesting that studios interfere quite a bit with strong IPs that have a fan base that no matter what you put out, people are going to be seated and they still think they know what's best instead of somebody who actually has studied the franchise, knows it, has loved it from the beginning, and they're like, yeah, just throw it, do this.
Yeah.
Is there something you would have changed? Is there in the whole storyline with from two to the rest of them? Is there something you would have added, in a sense, like a fan theory you like that you're?
There's a deleted scene from Halloween H2O where they show Jamie Lloyd's headstone, and something that simple, just removing the retcon elements from H2O and acknowledging that those things happened, that Jamie Lee Curtis's character had this daughter who had passed away, would have changed the whole trajectory of the series. One simple shot of that headstone would have changed everything, because after H2O, the series became very comfortable retconning over and over, and now we have 5 different timelines. But had they done that, had they acknowledged the past, even as simple as a 10-second shot, would Halloween have been as comfortable with the different directions and timelines and so on and so forth? I don't know. I'm not sure of that, but that would have changed everything and probably made H2O a little bit easier to swallow for some of those diehard fans who turned up their nose in 1998 because it didn't acknowledge the Thorn trilogy.
Where do you want to see the franchise heading now? Since Halloween ends, it's been a couple years. There's not really a buzz for another movie yet. Where would you love to see the franchise going?
I would love to see an anthology version on television, kind of Season of the Witch type stories, but made for TV. And I would love to see Michael Myers remain on the big screen. And that's kind of your separation of church and state. TV is for anthology. Michael Myers gets film. But I think since Blumhouse brought back Laurie in 2018 and did a full trilogy with her and gave that character closure, although we could argue if that was true closure. I'm sure not everybody agrees with that. It's time to do the same thing with Jamie Lloyd. I think that the future of the series, they should bring that character back, and it doesn't matter how they explain why she's back. It's something people want to see. They want to see Danielle Harris play that role one more time.
I wonder if I'm a huge fan of adult animation, so I feel sometimes certain franchises would do better. And I wonder if, because again, it goes back to the TikTok brain for the younger generations. Mm-hmm. Can they sit there and withstand the buildup to these stories instead of having the payoff so soon, right? But I also think certain movies drag it up. That would be interesting. Do you? Is there another franchise you would love to dive into, similar to this, that's kind of on your radar? That you're. I know we answered a little bit earlier, but is there one that you're hopeful for, maybe to do something similar?
There are. I made a joke about this the other day to my wife. I was like, there's 9 movies in the Conjuring universe by now.
Oh, yes.
I was like, maybe that's a future one. And I did really like The Conjuring Last Rites. So I think that's probably where that came from. And I know that film, people were kind of divided on it, but I walked out of the theater thinking I enjoyed that. But kind of comparing the real life Ed and Lorraine Warren to the version that we see on the big screen, that to me got my writer brain going. Friday the 13th, you cannot possibly top Crystal Lake Memories. That book is tremendous.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything for me to add to it. Nightmare on Elm Street, there's a new book that just came out that I actually haven't had a chance to read yet. It's only been out a few weeks, but I'm an Elm Street fan, so if there's more story left to tell, maybe. But I don't want to answer that until I read this new book that just came out. maybe it did kind of cover all the bases, and there's not much room for somebody like me to add to it. But Scream one day, I know there's a tremendous new Scream book that just came out, and Scream is probably my second favorite of all the franchises after Halloween. Ashley Cullen's book is just phenomenal. Can't say enough good things about her work, but that franchise is so early on. The seventh film is getting ready to come out, but it's got sea legs to last for a long time. So maybe that's a story that I can tell down the road. But my second book will not be franchise specific. I'll say that.
Okay. Is there an idea? Because again, I love your essays. So I would love to know more about just the horror genre in general from you, because you seem to have a very big passion for it. So as much as I loved learning about Halloween, just the little snippets of the history of horror and told through that franchise, I really enjoyed that. Conjuring would be interesting. I just recently I was a guest on another podcast, but I did one too where I broke down each movie based on the real case of what happened and are they frauds, and their relationship wasn't very lovey-dovey as people presume. I also saw Last Rites. It was okay in my opinion, but I saw it in 4DX. So I got a completely different experience on it.
The whole experience there.
Yeah. When that mirror started spinning, the whole seat, you felt like you were falling out of it. You're like, what is going on here? So
that would have been crazy.
Oh yeah, I saw Jaws recently in 4DX. It was actually my husband's first time seeing the movie overall.
Wow.
And that was pretty cool. And we're seeing Back to the Future as well when it comes to theaters in 4DX. So
I'm immensely jealous.
What is your favorite current horror movie from 2025? Have you seen any? Is there one that you would recommend?
Sinners. Yeah, I think Sinners is top of the cake for me. Or top of the cake. That's not an expression. It's
it's okay.
It's definitely the top of my list. It takes the cake. I combined two phrases there.
Yeah, Sinner. They're re-releasing it for IMAX on Halloween, so I'm intrigued to go back and see it. It's very beautiful. It's a very beautiful film. It's more of a period piece, in my opinion, with vampires. If I had to pick one, I probably would go with Bring Her Back or Together. Those two were a lot of grief movies. Like, have you noticed this trend in the last year? It's a lot about grief and acceptance of that and the different stages. Seems to be the current horror theme in the genre.
I'm glad for. We've been so trauma heavy for so long that grief, even though like they're compatible, like it still feels nice to be moving away from trauma into something else. And grief is fine. Grief is an emotion that we're able to explore in the horror genre, and you can get a lot of emotional depth out of it. The films you mentioned are tremendous. 2025, I think, has been a great year for horror. 2024 was a great year for horror.
Yeah.
The genre is in this really cool place where people are coming out to the theaters to see these films. Studios are comfortable producing it. People have embraced it, not just culturally, but critically too, and can't ask for any more. We are of the age that we grew up when horror films were the thing you found in the back of Blockbuster that nobody else was renting. And it was just a few people that would go into the store that wanted those movies. And it was like Motel Hell and other films that we love. But your parents were like, what are you renting? Like, what is this?
Sleepaway Camp. And
yes, these classics. And I love them. They're the splatter movies from yesteryear. But the genre's reputation has improved so much over the last 10, 15 years. Films like Scream in 96 began that journey of changing the genre's reputation. And we're in a cool spot right now because of it.
I agree. I think nowadays there's people who, not that, let me restate. Horror is one of the last few genres in film, I think, that people are passionate about who work in that industry. It's no longer where, I'm not saying people can't be passionate about action movies, dramas and stuff, but some of the times those movies are just kind of products that are on a conveying belt, and they're the same concept, but just different characters. Where horror, I think, takes way more risks in the genre to tell the story, and sometimes it lands and sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's because people in that genre, directors, cast members, they're passionate about it. They grew up with it, right?
Mhm.
Most of the time when I talk to people about it, it's like, oh, I saw this movie way too young than I would, and I fell in love with horror, and that's typically the story throughout. But I think it's the passion there, and elevated horror or not, I think it's being brought to the mainstream a little bit easier to digest, such as like the Conjuring movies.
Yeah.
Those to me are, I call them like popcorn film horror movies, where they're easy to digest amongst, I hate to say the word, but normies, like people who don't watch Sleepaway Camp, but they'll watch The
Absolutely.
Conjuring, you know.
Mhm.
And I think it's opened horror to a new whole audience. With that being said, we are at the hour. Is there anything other than, people go buy his book? It's linked in the description below, the Amazon link. Please go support Andrew. Is there anything you'd like to tell the audience about yourself or the book? Kind of plug yourself. Here you go.
Yeah, I genuinely appreciate how much people in the horror community have taken to my book. As a first-time author, it means the world. There's no marketing machine behind me, so it's just cool, supportive people that I've met on social media championing me, reading the book, and telling their friends how good the book is. That's given me the success that I've had so far. So every like, share, review on Amazon, these things mean the world to me. So I just genuinely thank you and know that every little bit helps.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for talking to me about this, about horror in general. You're welcome back anytime if you just want to talk about horror. You're more than welcome back.
I will take you up on that. It's been a blast.
Awesome. His book is in the description, Horror in Haddonfield. Please, guys, go buy it. Support it. His Twitter, or whatever you want to call it, X or Twitter, is in the description as well. Go ahead and follow him for any updated news on the book. For this channel, we'll be back tomorrow. We're going to be talking about the Demon Slayer movie. I've got a panel for that tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern, so tune in then. Again, Andrew, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Buy his book, folks. And with that being said, I hope everybody has a great night, and stay spooky, y'all. Bye.